In 1992, on a warm September evening, a young heiress and her husband vanished from their honeymoon suite in one of California's most exclusive coastal resorts. Their penthouse suite was untouched, their belongings left behind. The only trace, a single bloody handprint on the bathroom mirror. For decades, rumors swirled. Cult involvement, corporate cover-ups, a family curse. But no bodies were ever found. And the case, one of the most baffling disappearances in American history, remains unsolved to this day. If you want more stories of long-forgotten mysteries and buried secrets resurfacing decades later, don't forget to subscribe. The Pacific was restless that night. The tides struck the cliff with a steady violence, spraying salt mist into the air. From the wide balcony of the Halden Grand resort, the ocean looked infinite, an unbroken sweep of steel-blue horizon. The heiress leaned against the railing, her champagne glass catching the low amber glow of the outdoor lanterns. Vivian Calloway Halden, 23 years old, newly married, daughter of the Hotel Empire's founder. She wore an ivory silk slip that whispered in the sea breeze, and a thin sweater pulled around her shoulders. She looked down, 6 stories below, at the pool where the last stragglers from the evening's gala stumbled toward their rooms. Laughter floated up, brittle with alcohol and exhaustion. Behind her, the French doors stood open, revealing the suite. The penthouse had been decorated in the family's signature opulence: gilded mirrors, marble floors, mahogany armoires. A wedding gift from her father, the resort's patriarch. The penthouse suite was meant to mark the beginning of her new life. Except something about the night felt wrong. Vivian had felt it since the gala's closing toast. The way her father's oldest partner had gripped her hand too long. The way one of the hotel staff had brushed past her husband, murmuring something she couldn't quite hear. The way the champagne had burned her throat, sharper than usual, leaving her with a creeping nausea. Inside, Daniel, her husband of 2 weeks, sat in an armchair, his tie loosened, his dark hair damp from a shower. He looked exhausted but radiant, the flush of wine on his cheeks. "You're restless," he said softly, watching her silhouette against the glass. Vivian turned her head. His voice was gentle, but his eyes, those clear gray eyes she'd once found reassuring, now unsettled her. Maybe it was the drink. Maybe it was the night air. She smiled faintly. "It's the ocean. It feels louder tonight." Daniel chuckled, but didn't move from the chair. A moment passed. The clock on the mantel ticked toward midnight. Vivian set her champagne on the railing, then stepped inside, shutting the French doors behind her. The air inside felt close, heavy with the scent of roses from the bouquet that had been delivered earlier. White petals littered the carpet near the table, as if they had fallen too soon. "Maybe we should turn in," she said, reaching for the lamp switch. Daniel stood, crossing the room in a few long strides. He kissed her cheek, lingering, his breath warm. "To new beginnings," he whispered. She smiled again, but her unease only deepened. That was the last time anyone ever saw them alive. The next morning, housekeeping knocked at 8:30 a.m. No answer. By noon, when the couple failed to check out for their scheduled spa appointment, the staff used the master key to enter. The scene was pristine. Their luggage remained neatly stacked near the bed. 2 glasses of champagne sat half-drained on the table. The bed was untouched, perfectly made. But in the bathroom, on the mirror above the sink, a single handprint bloomed in rust red, the shape unmistakable. 5 fingers, spread wide, pressed flat against the glass. The resort locked down within the hour. Security combed every hallway, every stairwell, every service tunnel. No sign of Vivian or Daniel. By sunset, whispers were already spreading among the staff. Some said the couple had run off, eloping into the night with plans to escape the shadow of the Calloway Empire. Others insisted they had been taken, that the resort's enemies had finally struck where it would hurt most. But those who worked the night shift spoke of something stranger. They claimed they had heard a woman's screams, faint but distinct, echoing through the empty ballroom around 3 a.m. When police arrived, they found no blood, no struggle, no forced entry. Only the handprint, and a silence that seemed heavier than the fog rolling in from the ocean. For decades afterward, guests of the Halden Grand would ask for the Penthouse suite by name. Some out of morbid curiosity, some for the thrill of proximity to the unsolved. The suite was repainted, refurbished, even blessed by a priest flown in from Rome. But the stain of the handprint never fully faded. And so, the mystery began. Detective Samuel Ochoa had worked missing persons for 15 years, but nothing about the Calloway case felt like routine police work. He stood in the penthouse suite of the Halden Grand Resort, his leather notebook balanced against his forearm, as the late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows. The suite smelled faintly of lilies and salt air. Everything gleamed. Too perfect. Too curated. The kind of place meant to impress investors, not house a honeymoon. The bloody handprint stared back at him from the bathroom mirror. He had already noted its size, small, delicate, more likely a woman's. No smears, no drips, just one single, flat impression, like whoever left it had pressed her palm deliberately, firmly, into the glass. Ochoa adjusted his tie and turned back to the resort manager, a thin man in a tailored suit who hovered near the door. "And you're sure no one entered before housekeeping?" The manager shook his head, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Absolutely. We're meticulous with access records. Only housekeeping has master keys, and I verified the logs myself. The suite was locked from the inside when they arrived." "From the inside?" Ochoa frowned. "Yes, detective." The man's voice trembled, but he forced a polite smile. "Deadbolt engaged. We had to override electronically." That fact twisted in Ochoa's gut. Locked from within. 2 people inside, both gone. He crossed the suite again, running his hand over the pristine bedspread. Not a wrinkle, not an indentation, as if no one had slept there at all. The champagne glasses by the window were another story. Lipstick on one rim, a faint smudge of fingerprints on the other. "Bag those," Ochoa told the crime techs, who were already snapping photos. He crouched near the table, studying the bouquet of white roses. A few petals lay scattered on the carpet. They looked fresh, not wilted. "Delivered yesterday evening?" the manager supplied quickly, as though anticipating the question. "From her father." "Her father being Richard Calloway?" "Yes." Ochoa rose. The Calloway Empire had built this resort, and 6 others like it. Resorts that catered to foreign royalty, movie stars, and billionaires who never wanted their names in the press. Now the daughter of that empire was missing, and the press was already circling like sharks. He glanced at the manager again. The man's hands trembled slightly, too nervous for someone whose only concern should have been the hotel's reputation. "When did you last see Mrs. Halden?" "Vivian?" "At the gala. She and her husband left early, maybe 11:30. They seemed perfectly fine." Ochoa made a note. "And staff? Anyone see them after that?" "No. The hall cameras show them entering the suite. They never left." That was the detail that had everyone whispering. The surveillance tapes showed the Calloway's heiress and her husband walking down the plush carpeted corridor, arm in arm, smiling faintly as they vanished through the penthouse door. And then, nothing. No one came out. No one came in. Yet by morning, they were gone. The investigation unfolded quickly, as Ochoa knew it would. Officers combed the resort, guest rooms, storage closets, service tunnels, even the cliffside trails. Dogs sniffed luggage, searched kitchens, traced every corridor. Nothing. By nightfall, Ochoa stood in the resort's ballroom, which smelled faintly of wax polish and old perfume. He had requested the night staff remain for questioning. A waitress in her early 20s wrung her hands nervously. Her uniform smelled faintly of cigarettes. "I heard her," she whispered. "I swear I did." Around 3 in the morning, a woman screaming echoed down from here. Ochoa studied her face. "Why didn't you report it then?" She hesitated. "Because..." She glanced toward the manager, who hovered nearby like a hawk. "Because the ballroom's been empty since the gala. I thought maybe I was overtired, or maybe it was the wind." The manager's glare silenced her. Ochoa made a note anyway. Another staff member, a janitor in a faded uniform, swore he'd seen movement in the penthouse hallway around 2:30, a shadow near the elevator, but the cameras had caught nothing. Ochoa's instincts prickled. Too many half-glimpses, too many whispers, and yet nothing concrete. The Calloway family descended the following morning. Richard Calloway arrived by helicopter, his entourage spilling across the resort like a tide. He was tall, silver-haired, his tailored suit immaculate despite the humid coastal air. His new wife, Vivian's stepmother, wore black silk and diamond earrings that glittered like ice. Ochoa met them in a private lounge. The older man's presence filled the room. "My daughter and son-in-law are missing," Richard said without preamble. His voice was gravelly, deliberate. "And your department will find them. Quickly." "We're doing everything possible, sir," Ochoa said evenly. "But I need your cooperation." "Any reason your daughter or her husband might have wanted to leave suddenly?" "None." Richard's jaw tightened. "Vivian adored Daniel." She had everything to look forward to. The stepmother, Evelyn, crossed one leg over the other, her bracelets clinking softly. Unless she discovered something she wasn't supposed to. Richard's glare could have cut steel. Evelyn only smiled faintly, sipping her water. Ochoa noted the tension. It was too sharp to ignore. "Mr. Calloway," he continued, "is there anyone who might wish to harm your family? Business rivals? Former associates?" Richard leaned forward, his eyes cold. "Detective, in my position, everyone is a rival. But Vivian? She was untouched by those matters. Pure Ochoa didn't believe in purity. Everyone had shadows. That night, Ochoa drove home along the coastal highway, the ocean glinting silver in the moonlight. His mind replayed the details. Locked suite, no forced entry, no bodies, and a bloody handprint, deliberate and solitary. He thought of the heiress, last seen on camera walking toward her room, her hand resting lightly on her husband's arm, her life stretching ahead in glittering promise. Now she was a ghost story in the making. The following week brought no breakthroughs. Divers scoured the rocky waters below the cliffs, but found only driftwood and fish carcasses. Helicopters searched the coastline. The FBI joined, citing potential kidnapping. Reporters camped outside the resort, shouting questions about cults, debts, scandals. Rumors flared and died like sparks. Vivian had run away with a lover. Daniel had debts in Las Vegas. The Calloways were covering up an embezzlement scheme, but nothing explained the handprint, and nothing explained the locked door. On the 10th day, Ochoa received a call. A maid had found something. He hurried to the resort's lower levels, where the smell of mildew lingered. The maid stood pale and trembling beside a supply closet. Inside, stacked neatly among boxes of linens, was a pair of shoes. White satin heels, their straps torn, and faint, rusty smears along the inner sole. Blood. Ochoa crouched, bagging them carefully. His pulse quickened. Finally, something tangible. But when he looked up, he saw the resort manager standing stiffly in the hall, his face drained of color. "Those were supposed to have been disposed of," the man blurted, then froze as if realizing his mistake. Ochoa rose slowly. "Supposed to have been." The manager's mouth opened, then snapped shut. For the first time since the heiress and her husband had vanished, Ochoa felt the solid weight of a lead tightening around his throat. The Callaways weren't telling the whole story. And maybe, just maybe, the Halden Grand Resort itself was hiding something far darker than a missing couple. The Callaway family wanted answers, but Detective Ochoa suspected what they really wanted was control. Every day, press releases poured from their corporate office. Polished statements urging patience, assuring the public that the search for Vivian and Daniel was vigorous and comprehensive. Behind the scenes, though, Richard Callaway was leaning on everyone from the governor's office to the police chief. He wanted discretion. No scandal. No hint that the resort was unsafe. But Ochoa wasn't in the business of protecting reputations. He was in the business of finding the vanished. The supply closet shoes sat on his desk, tagged and sealed in evidence bags. White satin, scuffed on the toe, one strap nearly torn through. Forensics confirmed the smears were blood, though degraded by humidity. He traced a finger over his notebook. The maid's words echoed in his memory. I found them in the linens. Like someone hid them. If someone had hidden the shoes, then someone knew what had happened in that suite. The problem was figuring out who. Ochoa returned to the Halden Grand 2 days later, determined to dig beneath its polished facade. The resort loomed over the cliff like a fortress, all glass and marble, its manicured gardens perfumed with jasmine. Guests in linen suits and silk dresses drifted across the lobby, oblivious to the crime scene above them. He met the manager in his office, a narrow space behind the reception desk. The man's tie was too tight, his forehead damp. Explain something to me, Ochoa said, dropping into the leather chair opposite him. You told me the suite was locked from the inside. Yes, correct. And yet housekeeping had to override the deadbolt. Yes. Ochoa leaned forward. But if the couple never left, as the cameras show, then where are they? You're not running a magic show here. They didn't vanish into smoke. The manager swallowed hard. Detective, I'm doing everything I can to help. Truly, but this, he gestured helplessly. This resort has never faced anything like this. The Callaways expect truth, Ochoa finished for him. The man's eyes flickered, then dropped to his desk. It wasn't truth he feared. It was exposure. That night, Ochoa requested old records. If the Halden Grand had skeletons in its gilded closets, he intended to find them. The archives were stored in the basement, in a windowless room that smelled of damp cardboard. Boxes stacked high, their labels faded with dust. Ochoa flipped through ledgers, guest logs, incident reports. Most were mundane. Lost jewelry, drunken brawls, kitchen accidents. But then he found it. An incident report from 1976. Unexplained absence of 2 guests, Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker, New York. Disappeared overnight from room 509, luggage intact. Balcony door locked from inside. Search conducted, no trace found. The page was stamped closed in thick red ink. Ochoa's pulse quickened. Another couple. Same circumstances. Different decade. He dug further. 1979. A businessman from Chicago. Last seen entering the ballroom after midnight. Never checked out. Vanished. 1984. A chambermaid reported screams near the north stairwell. No guest was found missing, but she swore she had seen blood on the marble steps. The report was unsigned, buried. 1992 was not the first time. It was just the loudest. The next morning, Ochoa drove up the coast to meet a retired detective who had worked the Whitaker case back in the 70s. The man, Luis Mendoza, lived in a clapboard house overlooking the surf. His hair white, his back stooped. They pulled me off it, Mendoza said after pouring coffee into chipped mugs. Said the Whitakers probably ran off. Lovers' quarrel, gambling debts, take your pick. But I didn't buy it. Why not? Ochoa asked. Mendoza's eyes darkened. Because I stood in that room myself. Luggage packed, clothes in the closet, toothbrushes wet, balcony locked, and the bed. He shook his head. Perfectly made, like they'd never even lain down. Ochoa thought of Vivian and Daniel's suite. The untouched bed, the champagne glasses, the handprint, a pattern stretching back decades. You think the resort covered it up? He asked. Mendoza gave a bitter laugh. The Callaways own half this county. Back then, they owned the police chief too. No one wanted scandal. They buried it, same as they buried the Whitakers. Ochoa sipped his coffee. The ocean crashed below the cliffs. His mind spun with possibilities. Back at the precinct, he laid out photos across the table. Vivian, radiant in her bridal gown. Daniel, smiling at her side. The Whitakers, faded in black and white, their hair lacquered, their eyes bright with the confidence of wealth. Different eras, different lives, same vanishing. Maybe it's coincidence, his partner muttered. Ochoa shook his head. Coincidence doesn't leave blood on mirrors. By the second week, the press was ravenous. Reporters ambushed staff, shoved cameras into guests' faces. Tabloids splashed lurid headlines. Heiress taken by cult. Blood ritual in luxury suite. Richard Calloway grew colder, more distant. At a press conference, he dismissed the stories as fiction and threatened lawsuits. Evelyn, his wife, stood at his side with a smile that never touched her eyes. But Ochoa noticed something. When a reporter shouted, "What about the Whitakers, Mr. Calloway?" Guests vanished here before. Richard froze for half a second too long. Evelyn's hand tightened on his arm. And then Richard recovered, brushing past without comment. They knew. The ballroom was empty when Ochoa walked through it late one night. The chandeliers extinguished, the parquet floor glowing faintly in the moonlight. His footsteps echoed against the high ceiling. He thought of the waitress's testimony, the screams she had heard. He stood still, listening. The ocean beyond the glass thundered. The old wood creaked faintly. And then, so faint he thought he imagined it, a sound rose from the far corner. A woman's voice, whispering. He turned sharply, flashlight beam sweeping across the velvet curtains, the gilt mirrors. Nothing, but the sound had been there. A whisper of breath, gone as quickly as it came. He stood rooted in the center of the ballroom, the hair rising along his arms. The air felt charged, heavy with silence. He knew what the staff whispered, that the ballroom was haunted, that the Halden Grand kept its secrets long after the guests had left. But Ochoa wasn't hunting ghosts. He was hunting flesh and blood. And flesh and blood had left a handprint in that suite. The following morning, he confronted the manager again. "You've had disappearances before," Ochoa said, slamming the old files onto the desk. "Don't bother denying it. I've got records going back 20 years. The man paled. "Detective, People vanished from this hotel, and nothing was done. How many more? How many covered up?" The manager's voice cracked. "Please, you don't understand. If I talk, you'll lose your job," Ochoa snapped. "Better that than your soul." The man's lips trembled. His eyes darted toward the door, as though expecting someone to be listening. Finally, in a whisper, he said, "It's not the first time, and it won't be the last." Ochoa leaned in. "What do you mean?" The manager swallowed. "There are places in this hotel, passages, tunnels, old construction, sealed off when they built the new wings. Not all of them are empty." A chill prickled Ochoa's spine. "Where?" The man shook his head violently. "I've said too much." He refused to speak further, but Ochoa knew he had cracked something open. That evening, Ochoa lingered in the service corridors beneath the resort. Narrow passages lined with pipes, smelling of bleach and damp stone. The kind of places guests never saw, where the resort's gleam gave way to its bones. He walked slowly, his flashlight cutting through the dark. Pipes dripped. Rats scurried in the corners. At one intersection, he found a door bolted shut, rust creeping across the hinges. The faded stenciled letters read, "Storage." But when he pressed his ear against it, he heard something faint, breathing. He stepped back, his heart hammering. He called for backup. By the time officers arrived and forced the door open, the room inside was empty. Only dust, old crates, and a single red rose laid carefully on the floor. Fresh, as if someone had been there only moments before. Ochoa stared at the rose. Its petals glistened with dew. He thought of Vivian Calloway Halden, the heiress who had vanished into silence. And for the first time, he wondered if she might still be somewhere inside these walls. Detective Ochoa had spent his career listening for lies. He could tell when a witness was holding something back, when a grieving parent was guilty of more than they admitted, when a suspect's silence weighed heavier than any confession. And now he knew. The Halden Grand resort itself was lying. The hidden door, the fresh rose, the old files with vanished names, it all pointed toward secrets buried beneath the marble floors. The Calloways wanted him looking outward, toward kidnappers and cults. But the truth was inside these walls. 2 days later, Ochoa summoned Daniel Halden's parents to the precinct. They arrived in stiff silence. George Halden, a banker with a steel gray suit and a frown carved deep into his forehead, and his wife Martha, whose gloved hands trembled around her handbag. "Thank you for coming," Ochoa said, gesturing them into the interview room. "I need to ask about your son's relationship with the Calloways." George's frown deepened. Daniel was treated like family. Richard adored him. Ochoa tapped his pen against his notebook. "More like a business partnership?" George bristled. "You're suggesting my son married for money?" "I'm suggesting marriages and families like yours rarely come without strings." Martha's eyes welled. They loved each other. Anyone could see that at the wedding. Ochoa studied her carefully. She believed it, but her husband didn't echo the words. Did Daniel have financial troubles? Debts? Investments gone wrong? George's silence was answer enough. When he finally spoke, his voice was clipped. He made some risky ventures. Startups, international real estate. Vivian's dowry was well-timed. Ochoa made a note. Marriage as merger. Daniel with debts. Vivian with wealth. A motive, maybe, but for what? That night, Ochoa spread photographs across his kitchen table. Daniel with Vivian on their wedding day. Daniel with Richard Calloway at the gala. Daniel alone at a poker table 6 months earlier, cigarette dangling, eyes sharp. He circled the faces, drew arrows. Then he noticed something he hadn't before. In the background of the poker photo, blurred but unmistakable, sat a man in a black suit. Thin, bald, expression sharp. Ochoa had seen that face in the Calloway archives. Victor Hensley, once a business partner, later rumored to have retired after a scandal involving embezzled funds. And there he was, in a photo with Daniel, months before the wedding. Ochoa leaned back, the pieces shifting in his mind. Daniel hadn't simply married into the Calloway empire. He'd stepped into its shadows. The next day, Ochoa returned to the resort under the guise of routine follow-up. He walked the hallways slowly, greeting staff, watching their eyes dart away. He noticed which ones stiffened when he mentioned Vivian's name. Near the ballroom, he found the waitress who had spoken of screams. She was stacking chairs, her hair tied back, dark circles under her eyes. "You heard something that night," Ochoa reminded her gently. She nodded. "Yes, I shouldn't have said anything. Why not?" Her voice dropped. "Because people who talk too much around here don't stay long." Ochoa's chest tightened. "Are you saying staff have disappeared too?" Her silence was confirmation. Before he could press further, the manager appeared at the far end of the room, his expression tight. The waitress busied herself with chairs, lips pressed shut. The Callaway's reach stretched deep. That evening, Ochoa received a message slipped under his office door. No signature, just block letters scrawled on lined paper. Check the Founders Wing after midnight. The Founders Wing was the oldest part of the resort, built in the 1920s, long before expansion swallowed it whole. Guests rarely stayed there anymore. It was kept for nostalgia, the wallpaper faded, the carpets worn. Ochoa arrived at 12:15, his badge tucked into his jacket, a flashlight in hand. The wing was silent, the hall lamps dim. He passed portraits of the original Callaway founders, their painted eyes watching him. At the end of the corridor, he found a door marked private, locked. He pressed his ear to the wood. Silence. Then, faintly, something metallic scraping against stone. He picked the lock. Inside was a narrow staircase spiraling downward, lined with cracked plaster. The air smelled of mildew and something else, copper, sharp and faintly sweet. He descended slowly. The staircase ended in a stone corridor lit by a single bulb. The walls were rough, damp. He followed the sound of scraping until it opened into a low chamber. There, beneath the luxury resort, stood a row of rusted cages. Empty now, but stained with rust that looked far too much like old blood. Ochoa froze, his pulse racing. He raised his flashlight and caught something carved into the stone wall, initials scratched by fingernails, dozens of them. And near the bottom, one name stood out, crude but legible. Vivian. Ochoa staggered back, heart pounding. Vivian had been here. Recently. The scrape came again. He swung the flashlight toward the far corner. A rat scurried from a broken pipe. Nothing more, but the cages told their own story. Someone had used this place. Someone still might. By morning, Ochoa had the chamber sealed and photographed. His captain was furious. "You went down there alone? No warrant. If the Callaways push back, let them," Ochoa snapped. "Vivian scratched her name into that wall. She was there." But when the evidence team returned hours later, the chamber was empty. The cages were gone. The carvings had been scrubbed, as if the place had never existed. Ochoa held up his photos, his proof. But the captain only shook his head. "Do you know what kind of enemies you're making?" "Yes," Ochoa said. "The right kind." That night, Ochoa sat in his car overlooking the resort. Its lights glittered against the ocean, a fortress of wealth and secrecy. He thought of Vivian, of Daniel, of the Whitakers, of the waitress who whispered warnings, of the initials clawed into stone. This wasn't a kidnapping. It wasn't a lover's escape. It was a pattern. And the Callaway Empire was built on it. 2 weeks after the disappearance, a new lead surfaced. A fisherman, working the waters near the cliffs, reported pulling up something tangled in his net. Not a body. Fabric. Police examined it. A scrap of silk, ivory-colored, torn and waterlogged. Ochoa held it up to the light. The material matched the dress Vivian had worn the night she vanished, but the fabric had been cut, not torn, sliced cleanly with a blade. Someone wanted the ocean to tell a story, but Ochoa wasn't buying it. He turned back to Daniel. The debts, the poker games, the connections to Victor Hensley. He pulled phone records, tracing Daniel's last calls. 2 weeks before the wedding, Daniel had called a number registered to a shell company in Nevada. The company's listed director, Victor Hensley. Daniel wasn't just marrying Vivian. He was merging with Hensley, and now he was gone. The deeper Ochoa dug, the clearer the shape became. Vivian and Daniel had walked willingly into the suite that night. Something had drawn them there, or someone had been waiting. Hours later, Vivian had pressed her bloody hand to the mirror. A signal? A mark of defiance. And then they were taken. Not by strangers, not by chance. By the same shadows that had swallowed the Whitakers. Ochoa stared at the photo of Vivian on his desk, her smile luminous, her eyes alive. He made himself a promise. He would drag every secret out of the Halden Grand, even if it cost him his career. Because somewhere beneath the chandeliers and champagne, someone was still listening, and they weren't finished. The storm rolled in off the gulf like a curtain, blotting out the sun with heavy clouds. Rain streaked the glass of Detective Ochoa's office as he leaned over the photographs spread across his desk. Vivian's eyes smiled back at him from her wedding portrait, oblivious to what awaited her in the suite above the ocean. The carved initials from the hidden chamber still haunted him. He'd seen hundreds of crime scenes, but nothing shook him like those scratched letters, V-I-V-I-A-N. Proof she had been alive, fighting, trapped inside a place the resort had no record of. And now, the chamber itself had been scrubbed clean. Someone inside the Halden Grand was erasing the truth. Ochoa requested a list of all staff who had been employed at the resort during the Whitakers' disappearance in the 70s. Most were dead or scattered. But one name stood out, Harlan Pike, a night porter who had worked there for 35 years before retiring quietly last spring. Harlan was still in town. Ochoa found him at a boarding house on the outskirts, a peeling yellow building that smelled of fried oil and old tobacco. Harlan answered the door in slippers, his hair white, his eyes watery but sharp. "Detective," he rasped after Ochoa showed his badge. "Took you long enough. You know why I'm here." Harlan stepped aside. "Come in, but you didn't hear it from me." The old man's room was cluttered with stacks of newspapers and half-finished crossword puzzles. He lowered himself into a chair, wheezing faintly. "I seen things in that place," Harlan said, staring at the floor. "Things that don't leave a man." "Tell me about the Whitakers," Ochoa urged. "They weren't the first," Harlan whispered, "and they sure as hell weren't the last. People vanish up there every so often. Not regular guests, mind you. Always the ones tied up with the Callaways. Partners, rivals, men and women with money. Always money." Ochoa felt a cold knot form in his stomach, and no one spoke up. Harlan gave a bitter laugh. "Speak up. Against Richard Callaway. You'd be found floating by the pier. Everyone knew to keep quiet. Did you ever see anything directly?" The old man's eyes shifted, glassy with memory. "One night, must have been 84. I was polishing brass in the north stairwell. Heard a scream. Not just a drunk fight, not just someone slipping. Pure terror. I went up 2 flights and saw the blood on the steps. Wiped it clean before morning, just like they told me." "Who told you?" Ochoa pressed. Harlan's jaw tightened. "Manager back then. But he answered to Callaway." "Which Callaway?" The old man's voice dropped to a whisper. "Richard. Always. Richard." When Ochoa left the boarding house, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of wet asphalt and brine. Richard Callaway's name had been whispered often, but this was the first time it was tied directly to violence. Ochoa replayed Harlan's words. Always money. Always Richard. The heiress wasn't the first Callaway to vanish into the resort's shadow. She was just the first who mattered too much to be hidden easily. The next morning, Ochoa called Richard in for questioning. Predictably, the tycoon arrived with lawyers in tow, his silver hair immaculate, his jaw set. Evelyn trailed behind, diamonds at her throat, her expression unreadable. In the interview room, Richard folded his hands. "Detective, I've tolerated your obsession out of respect for the badge. But this circus ends now. Your daughter scratched her name into a wall beneath your resort," Ochoa said evenly. "Someone tried to erase it, but I have photographs. That makes this very real." Richard's face didn't flicker. "Fabrications, easily staged, then explain the disappearances," Ochoa pressed. "The Whitakers, the blood in the stairwell. The cages in the old chamber. People talk, Mr. Callaway. People who worked for you." For the first time, Richard's eyes hardened with open menace. "Be careful, detective. Dig too deep, and you'll find yourself buried." His lawyers ended the interview before Ochoa could push further. As they left, Evelyn glanced back. Her eyes lingered on Ochoa for half a second, something like pity or warning flickering there. That night, Ochoa couldn't sleep. He sat in his apartment with the blinds drawn, listening to the rain return in heavy sheets. He thought of Vivian, of her palm pressed against the mirror, of her name gouged into stone. Was she alive? The evidence suggested she had been, at least for a time. The rose left fresh in the chamber hinted someone was taunting him, letting him know she was close. He closed his eyes, exhaustion dragging at him. When he woke hours later, his phone buzzed with a new message. No name, no number, just a photo attachment. He opened it. A picture of Vivian. Alive. Her eyes were wide, terrified, her face pale under a bare bulb. Behind her, stone walls. The message beneath. Stop looking or she stops breathing. Ochoa gripped the phone, his breath sharp. Vivian was alive, somewhere beneath the resort. He forwarded the image to the precinct's cyber unit. They traced the metadata. Scrubbed clean. No location. No source. But the timestamp was current. Hours old. She was still here. The next evening, Ochoa returned to the Halden Grand. He walked the corridors like a guest, blending in with the crowd, though his badge weighed heavy in his pocket. The waitress found him near the ballroom. Her hands shook as she pressed a folded note into his palm. She's still here, the note read. But you're not the only one looking. Ochoa looked up, but the waitress was gone, swallowed into the staff passage. He followed his gut to the service tunnels. The air was damp, claustrophobic, lined with pipes and shadows. His flashlight swept over peeling paint, rusted hinges, old service doors. Halfway down the corridor, he froze. Footsteps behind him. He swung around, but the passage was empty. Only echoes. When he turned back, a rose lay on the floor at his feet. Fresh. His throat tightened. Someone was watching him, someone who knew every step he took. The next morning, the press exploded with a new headline. Calloway heiress alive? Mysterious photo leaked. The police chief demanded answers. Richard Calloway demanded silence, and Ochoa demanded resources. We can't ignore this, he told his captain. She's alive. I'll stake my career on it. Your career's what you're gambling, the captain muttered. And maybe your life. Watch yourself, Sam. But Ochoa wasn't listening. He was already planning his next move. 2 days later, a retired cook from the resort reached out anonymously. Ochoa met him in a diner off the highway, the smell of bacon and grease thick in the air. The cook's hands shook around his coffee mug. Back in the 80s, they called it the wing. Staff whispered about it. Guests didn't go there. Only certain people did. I heard chains sometimes. Saw men carrying crates at night. Never knew what was in them. Ochoa's pulse quickened. What happened to the guests who vanished? The man's voice broke. They didn't vanish. They were taken below. By who? By order of Richard. Always Richard. When Ochoa drove back along the coastal highway, the resort loomed against the storm, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. He thought of the cages, the initials, the photograph. Vivian wasn't lost to the ocean. She was trapped in the belly of her family's empire. And every step closer Ochoa came, the more dangerous it became, for her and for him. That night, he pinned the photo of Vivian to his wall. Rain hammered against the glass. You're alive, he whispered to her image, and I'll find you. The storm outside roared, as if daring him to try. Detective Ochoa had always believed that silence was a kind of language. In interviews, in courtrooms, in kitchens where widows clutched teacups, silence spoke louder than words. And in the Calloway family, Evelyn's silence was deafening. She stood beside Richard at every press conference, her pearls gleaming under camera lights, her hand looped loosely through his arm. She smiled when Richard spoke, nodded when the reporters shouted. But her eyes? Her eyes told a different story. Ochoa began to wonder, what did the second Mrs. Calloway know? He invited Evelyn to the precinct under the guise of clarifying her statement from the night of the disappearance. Richard sent word through his lawyers that she would not be attending. Hours later, she walked in on her own, unaccompanied, dressed in a gray silk suit. "I don't have much time," she said, lowering herself into the chair opposite him. "Richard doesn't like me being here." "That's exactly why I wanted you here," Ochoa replied. Her gaze flicked to the recorder on the table. "Is this on?" "No," he pushed it aside. "Unless you want it to be." Her lips pressed thin. She glanced at the door, then back at him. "You're not wrong, Detective. Vivian didn't just vanish." "Richard knows more than he admits." Ochoa leaned forward. "Tell me." She hesitated, fingers knotting together. "Richard built that resort on bones, not just the Whitakers. Others too. He has a way of making problems disappear. But Vivian," she faltered, her voice catching. "Vivian was different. She didn't trust him. She wanted out." Ochoa felt the ground shift beneath him. "Out of the marriage?" Evelyn shook her head. "Out of the family." She was ready to expose him. The deals, the bribes, the tunnels. She kept notes, hidden somewhere in that hotel. That night, Ochoa drove home with Evelyn's words echoing in his skull. Vivian wasn't just a victim. She was a threat to her father. A daughter who had seen too much, who intended to break free. He pulled the wedding photo from his wall. Vivian's smile, radiant. Daniel's hand around her waist. Behind them, Richard's face, stern, calculating. Maybe Vivian hadn't vanished because she was careless. Maybe she had vanished because she was brave. The following morning, Ochoa visited Vivian's best friend, Clarissa Dane, a socialite who had been her maid of honor. Clarissa received him in a sunlit conservatory filled with orchids, her hair swept into a loose bun, her fingers tapping nervously against her champagne flute. "Vivian was scared," Clarissa admitted after some coaxing. "She told me things I didn't want to hear. That Richard's empire wasn't just hotels and ballrooms. That there were—" She broke off, lowering her voice. "Rooms no one was meant to see. Places where people went in and didn't come out." Ochoa felt the chill crawl down his spine. "Did she tell you where?" Clarissa shook her head. "She just said she was keeping a record. If anything ever happened to her, someone had to know. Where did she keep it?" Clarissa's eyes filled with tears. "She never told me. She was afraid I'd be next." That evening, Ochoa walked the beach beneath the cliffs of the Halden Grand. The tide crashed against the rocks, and the resort rose above him like a cathedral of glass. He imagined Vivian pacing the suite that night, writing in a notebook, listening to the ocean. If her notes still existed, they were his only hope of proving what had happened. At dawn, Ochoa returned to the founder's wing, where the hidden stairwell had led to the chamber. This time, he brought a warrant and 2 officers. They searched every corner, every boarded door, every locked service hatch. In a storage alcove, behind rotting drapes, Ochoa's flashlight caught something metallic. A trunk, heavy, its hinges corroded. They pried it open. Inside lay stacks of hotel ledgers, brittle with age, marked with Richard Calloway's signature, guest names, payments, and next to certain entries, a red mark, an X. Ochoa flipped through. Each X coincided with a disappearance. The Whitakers, the businessman in 1979, even an unnamed guest in 1984. And then he saw it. Halden, Daniel, October 1992, X. His chest tightened. Beside it, another entry, written in smaller script. Calloway, Vivian, October 1992, hold. Hold, not dead, not erased, held. When Ochoa showed the ledger to his captain, the older man cursed under his breath. "This is dynamite, Sam." "But it's not enough. Richard will say it's a forgery. We need Vivian's notebook." Ochoa nodded grimly. "Then we find it." "Before Richard does." That night, Evelyn called him from an unlisted number. Her voice was taut. "He knows you found the trunk," she whispered. "He's furious. He's tearing the resort apart looking for her notes. If he finds them first." Her voice broke. "Detective, he'll kill her." "Where are the notes?" Ochoa pressed. "I don't know." But Vivian trusted her mother. Before she died, she gave her a locket. Said it contained a key. Maybe that's where she hid the clue. Ochoa visited the Calloway family mausoleum the next morning. The marble chamber smelled of lilies and salt. He stood before the sarcophagus of Margaret Calloway, Vivian's mother, dead of illness a decade earlier. Her portrait hung on the wall, gentle smile, soft eyes. He thought of Evelyn's words, a locket, a key. Carefully, he examined the flowers and offerings left on the tomb. And there, tucked behind the frame of the portrait, he found it, a small silver locket. Inside, a folded slip of paper. Coordinates. The coordinates led to a bluff a mile from the resort. At dusk, Ochoa hiked the path, his breath fogging in the cool air. The gulls circled overhead, their cries sharp. He reached the marked spot, a flat rock overlooking the sea. Beneath it, wedged into a crack, lay a waterproof tin. Inside, a notebook. Vivian's handwriting, neat but hurried. Ochoa's hands trembled as he flipped through pages filled with sketches of tunnels, notes on meetings, names of men Richard had dealt with in secret, descriptions of rooms where she had seen cages. And on the last page, "If you're reading this, I'm already gone. But Daniel and I are not running. We are being hunted, and my father is behind it." Ochoa's chest ached with the weight of it. Vivian had known. She had left behind her testament. He closed the notebook, tucking it under his arm. As he climbed back toward the path, he felt eyes on him. A figure stood at the crest of the hill, silhouetted against the setting sun. Tall, broad-shouldered, watching. Ochoa froze, his hand instinctively going to his weapon. The figure didn't move. Then slowly, it raised a hand and held up a rose, fresh, crimson against the twilight. Ochoa blinked, and in that instant, the figure was gone. That night, back at his apartment, Ochoa spread Vivian's notebook across his table. Each line was a dagger aimed at Richard Calloway. Bribes, cover-ups, disappearances, enough to tear the family empire down. But one entry froze him cold. "Daniel is not who I thought he was. He has been meeting with Hensley behind my back. I fear he is part of it. If I disappear, trust no one." Ochoa leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Daniel Halden hadn't just been a victim. He might have been a conspirator. And if that was true, Vivian wasn't just missing. She was alone. Detective Ochoa read the notebook's last page again, his eyes lingering on the line that turned the ground beneath him to ash. "Daniel is not who I thought he was. He has been meeting with Hensley behind my back. I fear he is part of it, Daniel. The grieving husband, the vanished groom, the man everyone had painted as Vivian's partner in tragedy. Could it be that he had played both roles, lover and betrayer?" The thought left a bitter taste in Ochoa's mouth. If Vivian had trusted no one, it meant she knew betrayal was coming from the man closest to her. The following morning, Ochoa summoned Clarissa Dane again. The maid of honor arrived at the station in oversized sunglasses, her nerves visible even through the gloss of wealth. "Clarissa," Ochoa began, spreading Vivian's notebook across the table. "Did she ever say anything to you about Daniel?" Clarissa hesitated. Her hands tightened around her handbag. "She loved him." "That's not what she wrote." Ochoa tapped the page. "She thought he was hiding things." Meeting with Victor Hensley, Clarissa's breath hitched. "She told me once that Daniel had secrets." She never explained, but the night before the wedding she cried in my arms, said she felt trapped, that she was walking into a cage dressed like a bride. Her voice broke. I told her to call it off. She said it was too late. Ochoa leaned back, heart pounding. Too late because Richard wouldn't allow it. Clarissa swallowed hard. Too late because Daniel wouldn't let her go. That night, Ochoa spread a new array of photographs on his kitchen table. Daniel at poker games. Daniel shaking hands with Hensley. Daniel entering the Callaway offices months before the wedding. The pattern was undeniable. Daniel wasn't just a debtor. He was a willing recruit. But something didn't add up. If Daniel was complicit, why vanish as well? Why mark him with an X in the ledgers? Unless betrayal cut both ways. Perhaps Daniel had thought himself safe, only to discover that Hensley and Richard had no use for liabilities. Ochoa rubbed his temples, exhaustion gnawing at him. Vivian had walked into a trap, and Daniel might have been bait. 2 days later, a call came from the forensic lab. They had re-examined the scrap of silk pulled from the fisherman's net. Microscopic traces of blood clung to the fibers, blood that matched Daniel's DNA from his dental records. Ochoa's throat tightened. Daniel had bled into the sea, but not Vivian. That evening, Ochoa drove to the cliffs beneath the resort. Waves thundered against the rocks, mist rising like smoke. He imagined Daniel falling or being thrown, the silk of his tuxedo tearing as he struck the jagged stone. But if Daniel had gone into the sea, why had Vivian been marked hold? The pieces shifted again, and Ochoa felt the shape of something darker. Vivian hadn't died with Daniel. She had been preserved, hidden, not out of mercy, but necessity. Vivian knew too much. The next morning, Evelyn requested another meeting. This time, she came to Ochoa's office just after sunrise, her face pale, her perfume faint. "He's moving her," Evelyn whispered, glancing nervously at the closed blinds. "Richard, he knows you're circling too close. He's shifting her out of the resort tonight." Ochoa's pulse kicked. "Where?" "I don't know. I only overheard fragments. But he mentioned the word cellar, the founder's wing." She nodded. "Yes, the tunnels. He's clearing evidence. You have one chance, Detective. If you want to find her alive, it's tonight." By dusk, Ochoa had assembled a small team of trusted officers. No brass, no leaks. Just men and women who had stood with him before, who knew what it meant to gamble careers on a lead. They parked unmarked cars a mile down the beach, approaching the resort from the cliffs. The air smelled of salt and rain, the gulls circling above as the tide withdrew. They slipped through a rusted service gate, flashlights dimmed. The tunnels yawned before them, breathing damp air. Ochoa's hand rested on his weapon. Stay quiet. Stay sharp. The passage twisted like intestines, lined with pipes that hissed and groaned. Their boots echoed on wet stone. Halfway down, Ochoa froze. Voices ahead. He motioned the others to silence. They crept forward until the glow of lanterns flickered against the wall. 2 men in black suits were hauling a figure between them. A woman, her head lolling, wrists bound. Vivian. Ochoa's heart slammed in his chest. He raised his weapon. "Police! Drop her!" The men spun, curses sharp, dragging Vivian toward a side passage. Gunfire cracked, deafening in the confined space. Stone splintered. Ochoa and his team advanced, bullets chewing through shadows. One of the men fell, his body crumpling into the wet floor. The other dragged Vivian desperately, vanishing into the tunnel. Ochoa sprinted, adrenaline burning. His flashlight beam caught them just as the man shoved Vivian into a steel door. He turned, weapon raised. The shot rang out. The man collapsed, blood spreading across his shirt. Vivian slumped against the wall, her wrists still bound, her eyes glassy with terror. Ochoa holstered his weapon, rushing to her. "Vivian!" "It's all right. You're safe now." Her lips parted, a sound escaping, hoarse, broken. "Daniel?" she whispered. Then she fainted. They carried her out into the storm, the rain washing blood and grime from her hair. Ambulance lights flared on the cliffs, paramedics rushing forward. As they loaded Vivian onto a stretcher, Ochoa stood in the rain, heart hammering. She was alive, but her words lingered like a curse. Daniel. At the hospital, Vivian drifted in and out of consciousness. She was pale, bruised, but alive. Doctors hooked her to IVs, whispered about dehydration and trauma. Ochoa waited outside the room until the chief physician approached. She's stable, the doctor said. But her mind, she's been through something severe. It will take time before she can speak clearly, Ochoa nodded. Time was a luxury Vivian might not have. Richard would not sit idle while his empire teetered. 2 days later, Ochoa sat at Vivian's bedside. Her eyes fluttered open, settling on him. For a moment, fear flickered there. "It's all right," he said gently. "You're safe now." "I'm Detective Ochoa. You left me a message." "In the tunnels." On the wall, recognition flickered. Her lips trembled. "He killed him," she whispered. "Who?" Ochoa leaned closer, her eyes filled with tears. "Daniel, they killed him. He thought he was safe, but he wasn't. They pushed him into the sea." Her voice cracked. "And they told me I'd join him if I didn't do what they wanted." Ochoa squeezed her hand. "Who told you?" But her strength failed. She turned away, tears streaking her face. That night, Ochoa replayed her words in his mind. Daniel had been complicit, yes, but in the end, he had been discarded. Just another pawn in Richard Calloway's game. Vivian had been spared, not out of love, but leverage. Held. The ledger's word burned in his mind. Hold. At midnight, as rain lashed the city, Ochoa's phone buzzed. A text message. No number. Just coordinates. The same bluff where he had found Vivian's notebook. He drove there alone, headlights carving through sheets of rain. The sea foamed white against the rocks as he climbed the path. At the top, under the storm, a man waited. Victor Hensley. His bald head gleamed in the lightning flash, his thin smile sharp. "Detective," he said, voice smooth. "Congratulations. You've found the heiress." Ochoa's hand went to his weapon. "Why are you here?" "To offer clarity." Hensley's smile widened. "Richard thinks he controls the board. But I placed the pieces long before he moved." Lightning cracked. For an instant, Ochoa saw the truth in Hensley's eyes. Richard wasn't the only predator in the shadows. And Vivian wasn't free. Not yet. The rain hissed across the bluff like 1,000 whispers. Detective Ochoa's hand hovered near his holster as Victor Hensley stepped closer, his black coat whipping in the wind. "You've been circling Richard like a moth," Hensley said, his voice cutting through the storm. "But Richard is just the flame. It's what feeds the fire that should worry you." Ochoa narrowed his eyes. "And what's that?" "You," Hensley smiled thinly. "Me? Yes. But not just me. Richard needed me. He always did. I brokered the deals, I washed the money, I made sure no one asked questions when bodies disappeared." He leaned closer, his breath hot despite the chill. "But Vivian was different. She was clever, too clever. She found my ledgers. She saw the pattern. She thought she could bring it all down, which is why you kept her alive," Ochoa said. Hensley's smile widened. "Ah, you're quicker than most. Richard wanted her gone. Blood has no loyalty, despite what men like him preach. But I saw her value. She was leverage." "She still is," Ochoa stiffened. "She's in a hospital bed under guard." "And yet," Hensley murmured, tilting his head toward the crashing sea, "you came here alone when I texted you. We both know your protection is a sieve. If I wanted her tonight, I could take her. The question is, why haven't I?" Lightning split the sky, illuminating Hensley's face, calm, almost amused. "You're playing your own game," Ochoa said slowly. "Of course." Hensley spread his hands. "And you, detective, are useful to me. You stir the nest. You flush out Richard's secrets. You gather the evidence I need. What do you want?" "To see Richard fall," Hensley said simply, "and to watch him burn with everything he built." When Ochoa returned to his car, rain dripping from his hair, his thoughts churned like the storm. Hensley wasn't lying, at least not entirely. His arrogance was too steady. He had shielded Vivian, but not out of kindness. She was currency, and Ochoa had just been pulled into the transaction. Back at his apartment, he pinned another photograph to the wall. Hensley and Richard shaking hands outside the resort in 1985. Both younger, both smiling the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. Vivian had been caught between predators, and now Ochoa was too. 2 days later, Vivian was strong enough to speak in longer bursts. Her room smelled faintly of antiseptic and roses. Somebody had left them on the table, though no one admitted who. Ochoa sat beside her, notebook open. "Tell me what happened after Daniel." Her eyes flickered with pain, but she forced the words. "They made me watch." Richard didn't look at me once. It was Hensley who did the talking. He said I could live, but only if I stayed quiet. He locked me away. Days blurred. Years, maybe. "Why keep you alive?" Her hands twisted in the blanket. "Because I knew where the money was hidden. Offshore accounts. Codes. Mother taught me things before she died. Richard never knew she left it all to me." Ochoa's chest tightened. "And Hensley knew?" She nodded faintly. "He said I was insurance. That as long as I breathed, Richard couldn't touch him. That if I ever disappeared, the accounts would vanish too." Ochoa scribbled notes, though his mind raced. Vivian wasn't just a victim. She was the key to a fortune, and a weapon in a war between two men who thrived on shadows. That night, Ochoa was awakened by a call from the hospital guard. His voice was tense. "Detective, we've got a problem. Someone tried to get into Vivian's room. Security cameras caught a man in scrubs, but he slipped away before we could stop him." Ochoa sat up, heart pounding. "Is she safe?" "Yes, sir," but shaken. "We've doubled the guard." Ochoa hung up, staring into the darkness. Hensley's words came back to him. If I wanted her tonight, I could take her. It hadn't been a boast. It had been a warning. The next day, Ochoa met Evelyn in a cafe by the waterfront. She wore dark glasses, her posture brittle. "He's unraveling," she whispered. "Richard knows Vivian's alive. He knows she has the codes. He's desperate. He'll burn the hotel if he has to." Ochoa leaned forward. "Why are you telling me this?" Her lips trembled. "Because I can't live in his shadow anymore. Because I see what he does to people who stand against him. And because—" She faltered, tears glinting. "Because Vivian deserves better than what we gave her." Ochoa studied her. For the first time, Evelyn's silence had cracked, and what spilled out wasn't cold calculation but guilt. "Help me stop him," he said. Her eyes hardened. "I will. But you have to promise me one thing. When Richard falls, he never gets back up." That evening, Ochoa returned to the tunnels with 2 officers. They searched deeper than before, past rusted gates and crumbling stairs. The air was thick with mold, the walls sweating damp. In a chamber beneath the east wing, they found something new. Chains bolted to the wall, recent marks scoring the stone, scraps of cloth, a single shoe, Vivian's prison. Ochoa's flashlight beam caught something carved into the wall beside the chains. A single word, gouged deep, H-E-L-P. His chest ached. She had been here for years, leaving messages in silence, and someone had scrubbed them away until only this one remained. Back at the precinct, Ochoa spread Vivian's notebook, the ledgers and the photographs across the board. The pattern sharpened. Richard's greed, Hensley's cunning, Evelyn's guilt, Daniel's betrayal. At the center of it all, Vivian. She had been a witness, a threat, a bargaining chip. And now she was alive. That made her more dangerous to them than ever. The storm broke again that night, thunder rolling across the city. Ochoa sat at his desk, staring at the board when his phone buzzed. A video file. No number. He hesitated, then played it. The screen showed a dark room. Chains rattled. A woman sobbed softly. Then a voice. Richard Calloway's, cold and sharp. "She thinks she's safe," he said. "But safety is an illusion. Tell Ochoa if he wants to keep her breathing, he'll bring me the notebook." The camera shifted. A knife glinted in the light, pressing against a throat. Vivian's. The screen went black. Ochoa sat frozen, bile rising. The video was new. Vivian was at the hospital. Or so he thought. His phone buzzed again. Another message. "You have 24 hours. He grabbed his jacket and bolted for the hospital. Guards met him in the corridor, confused by his urgency. "Where is she?" Ochoa demanded. "In her room, sir." Sleeping. They opened the door. The bed was empty. The window latch hung broken. The roses on the table were gone. The hospital corridor reeled around Detective Ochoa as he stared into the empty room. The sterile sheets were cold. The IV stand toppled. A thin line of rainwater streaked across the sill, proof that the storm outside had swallowed Vivian whole. "Check every camera," he barked to the guards. "Every hallway, every exit." Now they scrambled, radios crackling. Ochoa stepped closer to the window. 3 stories down, the lawn glistened with rain. A service truck idled by the loading dock. Too convenient, too clean. Vivian hadn't walked out. She'd been taken, and the roses were gone. By dawn, the security footage confirmed his fears. A man in a hospital orderly's uniform wheeled a covered gurney through the service corridor. The guards had waved him past, assuming it was routine. Minutes later, the service truck pulled away. The timestamp, 2:14 a.m. Vivian had been stolen from under their noses. Ochoa drove to the bluff as the sun broke weakly through clouds. His chest ached with exhaustion, but his mind burned. 2 predators circled him. Richard, whose voice had cut through the video, and Hensley, whose hands always stayed invisible. Which one had her now? He thought of Evelyn's trembling voice, warning him Richard would burn the hotel. He thought of Hensley's smug confession. If I wanted her tonight, I could take her. They were both capable, both desperate, and Vivian was the price. That evening, Evelyn called from an unlisted number. Her voice was sharper, less fragile. "He has her," she said. "Richard?" "Yes. He's hiding her under the east cellar, where the tunnels meet the wine vault. He plans to move her again tomorrow night, out of state." "You have until then." Ochoa closed his eyes, the pieces locking into place. "Why are you telling me?" Her silence was long. "Because I'm tired of burying bodies. If he destroys her, I'm next." Her voice dropped. "And because she's family, Detective. She deserves to live." The raid began at midnight. Ochoa led 5 officers through the service entrance of the Halden Grand. The hotel loomed above them, its windows gleaming like blind eyes. They descended the stairwell, boots crunching on damp stone. The tunnels swallowed them in silence, the air thick with mildew and the faint sting of wine. Half an hour in, a lantern glow flickered ahead. Voices. Ochoa raised his fist. They crept forward until the passage opened into a vaulted chamber lined with dusty barrels. At the center stood Richard Calloway. His silver hair gleamed in the lantern light. His tailored suit was immaculate, as though the damp couldn't touch him. Vivian was kneeling beside him, wrists bound, a strip of silk tied around her mouth. Her eyes locked on Ochoa's the moment he entered. Richard's smile was thin. "Detective, you've been a thorn long enough. Ochoa leveled his weapon. "Let her go." Richard chuckled softly. "Do you know what it is to build an empire? To take stone and water and bend them until they serve your will?" Vivian never understood. She wanted to tear it down. She thought truth mattered. His eyes hardened. "But truth is clay. It belongs to the hands that mold it. Step away from her." Richard tilted his head. "If I kill her now, all I lose is a daughter who betrayed me. But if I keep her, she remains leverage. Against Hensley. Against you. Against anyone foolish enough to imagine justice exists." The officers shifted. Weapons drawn. The air vibrated with tension. Then, from the far side of the vault, another voice spoke. I couldn't have said it better myself. Victor Hensley stepped out of the shadows, flanked by two men in dark coats. His bald head gleamed, his grin razor-sharp. "Richard," he purred, "still clinging to your throne in the dirt." How pitiful Richard's eyes blazed. "You brought the police here?" "No," Hensley said lightly. "I simply followed their noise. And now we settle this properly." Ochoa's pulse thundered. The chamber had become a cage, and Vivian was the bait. Hensley snapped his fingers. One of his men dragged a heavy duffel onto the floor, unzipping it to reveal stacks of bound cash, glistening under lantern light. "The last of your offshore stash," Hensley said, "or what your daughter could access before she was taken from her cozy bed. All the codes, all the transfers. She gave them to me, Richard." Willingly, Vivian shook her head violently, her muffled cry sharp. Ochoa's gut twisted. Lies, or half-truths. In Hensley's hands, both cut the same. Richard lunged forward, fists trembling. "You snake! You think you can take everything from me?" Hensley smiled. "I already have." The standoff exploded. Gunfire cracked like thunder. Officers ducked behind barrels. Bullets ricocheted, showering stone dust. Richard's men and Hensley's clashed in the confined space, shouts mingling with screams. Ochoa dove toward Vivian, slicing the silk from her wrists. "Move!" She staggered to her feet, eyes wild. The chamber roared with chaos. Richard fired wildly, his face twisted with rage. "You'll never have her!" Hensley ducked, returning fire. His grin never faltered. Ochoa dragged Vivian toward the tunnel mouth, shielding her with his body. Behind them, lanterns shattered, plunging half the vault into darkness. "Go!" he shouted at his team. Two officers covered their retreat, rounds sparking off stone. Vivian stumbled, clutching Ochoa's arm. Her breath came in ragged gasps, but she kept moving. At the far end of the passage, another figure appeared. Evelyn. Her coat dripped with rain, her hands trembling as she raised a small revolver. "Stop!" she cried, her voice echoing. Everyone froze. Her gun was aimed at Richard. For the first time, Richard's expression cracked. His eyes widened, his mouth opening in something between fury and disbelief. "Evelyn," he hissed. "Put that down!" Her hand shook, but her gaze stayed fixed. "No, you took everything, my life, my freedom, my dignity. You won't take her." Vivian's voice cracked as she ripped the gag from her mouth. "Evelyn, don't!" The chamber vibrated with tension. Richard's gun swung toward his daughter. Hensley's men raised theirs toward Evelyn. Officers shouted warnings. The storm outside howled through the cracks in the stone, and then Evelyn pulled the trigger. The shot struck Richard in the chest. His body jerked, the lantern light catching the bloom of red against his suit. He staggered backward, colliding with a barrel before collapsing to the floor. Silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Hensley began to laugh. Slow, deliberate, cruel. "Well," he said softly, "the king is dead." Ochoa shoved Vivian toward the exit. "Move, now!" Gunfire erupted again. Evelyn screamed as Hensley's men fired back, but officers returned the barrage. The chamber filled with smoke, shouts, chaos. Ochoa and Vivian broke into the tunnels, their footsteps pounding in rhythm with their racing hearts. Behind them, the war raged on. Power, greed, betrayal detonating in stone and blood. But ahead, a thin slice of moonlight beckoned. They stumbled into the night, gasping in the cold sea air. Rain stung their faces, waves crashing against the cliffs. Vivian collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Ochoa crouched beside her, gripping her shoulder. "It's over," he said, though the words rang hollow even in his ears, because Richard lay bleeding, but not dead. Hensley still walked, and the war they had ignited had only begun. Rain drummed on the hospital windows as dawn broke, gray light spilling across the polished floor. Detective Ochoa sat in the corridor, his shirt damp, his hands stained with stone dust. A nurse passed briskly, whispering to a colleague, "Gunshot victim, stable but critical. They're moving him to ICU. Richard Calloway wasn't dead." Ochoa leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He had watched the man fall, blood blooming across his chest. He had heard Evelyn's revolver crack like thunder. Yet Richard clung stubbornly to life, as though even death refused to claim him until he'd had the last word. Behind the ICU door, machines hissed and beeped. Guards stood rigid. The patriarch of the Halden Grand was no longer untouchable. But he wasn't gone. Not yet. Vivian lay in another wing, her body wrapped in blankets, her wrists still raw. She looked fragile, but her eyes burned with something different now. Not just fear, but fury. Ochoa entered quietly, pulling a chair to her bedside. "How are you holding up?" he asked. Her lips trembled. "He's still alive, isn't he?" Ochoa hesitated. Yes, for now she shut her eyes, a tear slipping down. "He always survives. No matter what anyone does, Richard Calloway survives." Ochoa leaned closer. "You don't have to face him again. We'll protect you." Her laugh was small, bitter. "Protect me?" They protected him. All those years, those tunnels, the chains. "He fed on me like I was part of his empire." Her voice cracked. "You don't understand what he made me do." She turned her face to the window, the rain streaking glass like veins of mercury. "After Daniel, after they killed him, Richard said I was to carry the family's weight. He made me sign papers, transfers, authorizations. I became his ghost, the heiress who never lived. And every time I resisted, he reminded me where Daniel's body lay." Her hand clenched the blanket. "At first, I thought Hensley was the cruel one, but it was Richard who decided which breath I was allowed to take." Her words poured out in ragged gasps, as though breaking a dam. Ochoa scribbled notes, but more than that. He listened. Each confession weighed heavier than the last. "Vivian," he asked softly, "why didn't you tell me sooner? Why not write it in the notebook?" Her eyes opened, meeting his with hollow resolve. "Because if anyone ever read it, they would die. Richard promised me that, and I believed him." That afternoon, Evelyn was brought into custody. She sat across from Ochoa in the interrogation room, her hands folded neatly, her expression eerily calm. "You shot him," Ochoa said. "Yes. You nearly killed your husband." Her lips curved in something not quite a smile. "Not nearly enough. You'll be charged." She shrugged. "I've been charged since the day I married him." "This is just paperwork." Ochoa studied her. "Why now? After all these years of silence?" Her eyes flickered. "Because I saw Vivian's face in those tunnels. Because I remembered what I lost. And because I finally realized I'd rather burn beside her than rot behind him." For a moment, her composure cracked, and grief bled through. "I should have saved her sooner." That night, Ochoa couldn't sleep. His apartment walls pressed in, lined with maps, photos, ledgers. Every thread looped back to Richard. And yet, Hensley's shadow loomed too, patient, watchful, smiling in the dark. The ledger marked hold had been prophecy. Vivian had been suspended between them, not alive, not dead, her value preserved. Now she was free. Richard was wounded, Evelyn was in custody, but Hensley was waiting. The following morning, Ochoa received a package with no return address. Inside, a single VHS tape, its label smudged but legible. Halden Grand, 1984. He found an old player in the evidence room, connected it to a monitor, and pressed play. The screen flickered to life, grainy footage of a ballroom under chandeliers. Guests in black ties swirled across the floor. A string quartet played faintly. Then the camera panned, unsteady, capturing a younger Richard with his arm around Vivian. She looked radiant, but her smile was tight, forced. The camera zoomed closer. In the corner of the frame, Daniel appeared, speaking to Victor Hensley. Their heads leaned close, their hands exchanging a slip of paper. The image froze in Ochoa's mind. Daniel's betrayal, captured decades before his death. The tape crackled, shifted. Another scene. Vivian, alone on a balcony, her face pale. A voice off-screen. "Richards, you belong to this family, Vivian. You'll never leave. Even if you die, you'll still belong." The tape cut to static. Ochoa sat frozen, bile rising in his throat. The past wasn't just buried in ledgers. It lived in images, in words, in proof that Richard's control had been sealed long before the wedding day. And Hensley had the tape all these years. That evening, Ochoa returned to the hospital. Richard lay in ICU, machines whispering, his chest rising with effort. Vivian was in a guarded room down the hall. She stirred as Ochoa entered, her voice faint. "They'll never let me go," she murmured. "Even now." "I'm still," as Ochoa shook his head. "No, he's finished." Her eyes searched his face. "You don't believe that." Silence stretched. Finally, Ochoa admitted, "Not as long as Hensley breathes." Vivian's lips curved in something like despair. "Then I'll never be free." At midnight, alarms shattered the silence. Nurses rushed down the ICU hall. Ochoa bolted upright as red lights strobed. Richard Calloway had coded. Through the glass, Ochoa watched doctors compress his chest, inject clear liquid, fight to pull him back. The monitor spiked, then steadied. The old man lived. But in the chaos, Ochoa noticed something no one else seemed to. A nurse slipping silently out a side door, her face too hidden, her pace too calm. And in her hand, tucked beneath her sleeve, was a red rose. The rose glistened in the dim hospital corridor, its petals leaving droplets along the nurse's sleeve. Detective Ochoa's instincts screamed. Roses had marked every stage of Vivian's captivity. On the table in her hospital room, in the vault beneath the Halden Grand, scattered across the suite the night she disappeared. He pushed through the ICU doors, ignoring a doctor's protest. By the time he reached the stairwell, the woman was already descending. Her shoes clicked softly against concrete, unhurried, deliberate. Ochoa drew his weapon. "Stop!" She turned her head just enough for him to glimpse her profile under the cap. Not a stranger. "Evelyn." He froze, pulse thundering. She had been in custody. He had seen her booked, processed, locked away. Yet here she was, carrying the rose like a sigil. Her lips curved faintly. "You never understood, Detective. Locks don't hold people like me. Put it down," he ordered. Her eyes glittered in the shadows. "Richard lives because I allow it. Vivian breathes because I choose it. And you've been useful. But utility has limits." Before he could move, she dropped the rose onto the stairwell landing and slipped through the fire door, vanishing into the night. By the time Ochoa reached the exit, the parking lot was empty. Rain slicked the asphalt, reflecting only the strobe of ambulance lights. Evelyn was gone, leaving nothing but the rose. He bent down, lifting it carefully. The petals were damp, but beneath the perfume lingered another scent. Copper, faint but unmistakable. Blood. The following morning, Ochoa studied the rose in the lab. The petals bore microscopic traces of type AB blood, rare and valuable for identification. But whose? Vivian's? Richard's? Someone else's entirely? The petals also carried fine dust, crystalline under magnification. The tech identified it as salt residue, sea spray. Ochoa's gut tightened. Evelyn hadn't just vanished. She'd returned to the cliffs. He drove to the bluff that overlooked the crashing Pacific. Waves slammed against rock, spraying foam that clung to the air like mist. Gulls shrieked overhead. The old Halden boathouse stood at the base of the cliff, a ruin long condemned. Its roof sagged, windows boarded. Locals said smugglers had once used it. Later, whispers claimed Richard stored things there he didn't want found. Ochoa forced the rusted padlock, the door groaning open. Inside, the air reeked of brine and mildew and roses. Bouquets littered the floor in various stages of decay, some fresh, some wilted, some little more than dried husks. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Their petals formed a carpet of red and white. In the center of the room stood a chair. On it, a leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed, its spine cracked. The same style as Vivian's notebook. Ochoa opened it carefully. The handwriting was delicate, looping. Not Vivian's, Evelyn's. Page after page cataloged dates, names, sums, deliveries to the tunnels, transfers overseas, payoffs to silent staff. Even the night of Vivian's disappearance, meticulously logged, as if Evelyn herself had kept the score. And on the final page, a single line, written in fresh ink. The rose chooses who remains. Back at the precinct, Ochoa spread Evelyn's ledger beside Vivian's notebook. The two mirrored each other like twin diaries, one of survival, the other of complicity. Vivian had been trapped in stone, Evelyn in silence, but both had recorded everything Richard built, and Hensley fed on. The balance of power had shifted. Now Evelyn was moving her own pieces, roses marking each step. That night, Ochoa visited Vivian again. She was awake, her face pale but resolute. He laid the new ledger on her blanket. She stared at it, fingers trembling as she turned the pages. "Her handwriting," she whispered. "I remember. She used to write letters I never saw. I thought they were to friends, to family. But they were records. Why keep it?" Ochoa asked. Vivian's eyes darkened. Because she always believed Richard would fall. And she wanted proof it was by her hand. Ochoa hesitated. "Vivian, she's still out there. She walked out of the hospital last night. Tears welled in her eyes. Then it isn't over." It never is. The next day, Richard stirred in ICU. His eyes flickered open, hazy with painkillers. Ochoa was summoned, though the doctors warned his lucidity was questionable. Richard's lips cracked as he rasped, "Vivian." "She's safe," Ochoa said. "For now." His eyes narrowed. "Not from her." "From Evelyn?" A faint smile curved his mouth. "She loved me, even when she hated me. That's why she'll never let me go. And if she can't have me," his breath rattled, "she'll take Vivian instead." The monitor beeped steadily, his chest rising with stubborn rhythm. Ochoa left the ICU with a chill crawling his spine. Richard was a monster, but his survival instincts had never been wrong. That evening, Ochoa received another unmarked package. This time, not a tape, a single photograph. Vivian on the hospital balcony, taken from outside, through the rain-streaked glass. Her figure blurred, fragile, unaware she was being watched. On the back, in looping script, "The rose is patient." But not forever. Ochoa doubled the guard. He warned Vivian not to step near the windows, not to trust any uniform, not even the nurses. But inside, he knew the truth. Evelyn had already been inside once. She could do it again. And somewhere in the shadows, Hensley still smiled, watching two women tear at each other over a legacy that smelled of roses and blood. 2 nights later, the storm returned. The hospital lights flickered under the weight of the wind. Ochoa stood outside Vivian's door, nerves raw. At midnight, his phone buzzed. A text, no number. Meet me at the boathouse. Come alone. She deserves the truth. Ochoa's jaw clenched. A trap. But the truth was bait he couldn't ignore. He checked the guard. No one leaves this door. Not for anyone. Then he stepped into the storm. The boathouse was darker than before, the rose-petaled floor wet with new rain. Evelyn waited in the center, her revolver at her side, her hair plastered to her face. "You came," she said simply. "You're tearing her apart," Ochoa replied. Her eyes glistened. "Don't you see? She was never supposed to exist outside those walls. Richard made her a ghost, and ghosts can't live among the living." "She's not a ghost," Ochoa said. "She's flesh. She's blood. She survived everything he did, and survival is the cruelest prison of all." Evelyn lifted the revolver. Not at Ochoa. At the ledger on the chair. "This is the truth you wanted. But truth doesn't free us. It binds us." Her finger tightened on the trigger, and as Ochoa lunged forward, the gunshot split the night. The gunshot ricocheted through the boathouse like a crack in the earth. The smell of gunpowder mingled with roses and seawater. Detective Ochoa slammed into Evelyn, knocking the revolver from her grasp. The ledger on the chair had split apart, its pages fanning across the floor. The bullet had ripped through the spine, leaving a jagged hole where decades of secrets had been bound. Evelyn writhed beneath Ochoa, her strength wiry, desperate. "You don't understand," she gasped. "If they see it all, she'll never escape. They'll drag her back in. They'll never stop." Ochoa pinned her wrists, sweat pouring down his temple. "The truth doesn't vanish because you burned paper." Her eyes blazed, fever bright. "Truth isn't freedom. It's a chain. I've worn it all my life. Now it's her turn." He cuffed her, breath ragged. She sagged against the damp wood floor, tears streaking through the grime. "Then kill me," she whispered, "before I finish what Richard started." By dawn, Evelyn sat in holding, her silence heavy. The boathouse had been sealed, evidence teams collecting the shattered ledger. Yet Ochoa knew half the story was gone. The bullet had destroyed key pages, leaving fragments of names and dates. Vivian asked to see Evelyn. Against protocol, Ochoa hesitated, but agreed. They met in a quiet room at the precinct. Two women, both pale, both carved by the same legacy. Vivian sat across from her stepmother, her hands trembling in her lap. "Why?" she whispered. Evelyn's face softened, her eyes red-rimmed. "Because you remind me of myself, and I couldn't watch you live the same death. You were supposed to protect me." Evelyn flinched. "I tried, in ways you'll never know. When Richard wanted you broken, I softened his blows. When he ordered roses for your suite, I made sure they carried perfume, not poison. Every small mercy was mine. But mercy wasn't enough," Vivian's voice cracked. "You chained me. I chained myself too." Evelyn's tears fell freely now, and I can't forgive myself for that. Silence stretched between them, fragile as glass. Finally, Vivian rose, her chair scraping softly. "Then I forgive you," she said, her voice shaking. "But I'll never forget." Evelyn closed her eyes. That night, Ochoa returned to the hospital. Richard remained alive, his body refusing surrender. He lay unconscious, but his presence pressed against the air like a weight. Vivian stood at the window of her guarded room, staring at the rain. The storm had passed, but clouds lingered heavy over the Pacific. "I saw her," she murmured. "Evelyn." Ochoa nodded. "She's in custody now." Vivian's voice hollowed. "Do you think she's right?" "That truth is just another prison." Ochoa stepped closer. "Truth is painful. It doesn't always set you free, but lies are worse. Lies rot you from the inside until there's nothing left." Her reflection in the glass looked thin, ghost-like. "Then maybe I've been rotting since 1992. 2 days later, Richard woke. Ochoa was present when his eyes opened, their gray depths as sharp as ever despite the tubes and monitors tethering him. "You've failed," Richard rasped, his voice like broken glass. Ochoa folded his arms. "Vivian is alive. Evelyn turned on you. Your empire is crumbling. I'd say I haven't failed." Richard's mouth twisted into a smirk. Empires don't crumble, they adapt. Cut off a head, another grows. Do you think Hensley waits in the dark for scraps? He's already moved. He has what he needs. And what's that? Richard's laugh was soft, chilling. Not money, not land, blood. Blood is legacy, and Vivian's is priceless. The monitor beeped steady, but Ochoa's stomach churned. That evening, Ochoa gathered every surviving page from Evelyn's ledger and Vivian's notebook. Side by side, the two diaries told a fractured story, overlapping names, dates, sums. But one page from Evelyn's book chilled him most. Transfer scheduled. North Pier, 1992. Cargo secured. Witness eliminated beneath it, scrawled in different ink. The girl remains. Ochoa felt his chest tighten. Cargo, witness, girl. It wasn't just about Vivian. Someone else had been taken the night she vanished. Someone whose existence had been erased. He stared at the pages until dawn. The next morning, Vivian requested her notebooks. Not the evidence copies, but her originals, frayed and water-stained. She sat with them spread across her lap, her pen trembling in her hand. "For years," she whispered, "I thought I was writing to myself, but I was writing to him. Richard. Everything I scribbled, he found. He wanted me to confess, to pour myself out so he could drink it." She looked up at Ochoa, her eyes raw. But if Evelyn's right, if truth is a chain, then maybe the only way to break it is to stop writing. She snapped the notebook shut with a finality that sent a shiver down Ochoa's spine. That night, the hospital guard reported movement near Vivian's window. A figure in the garden, half hidden by shadows, leaving roses along the hedge. When Ochoa arrived, the figure was gone, the roses fresh, wet with dew. 7 of them. 1 for each year between Vivian's disappearance and the day her name had been declared legally dead. On the last stem, tied with silk, a note. "The rose is almost finished choosing." Ochoa pocketed it, heart pounding. Evelyn was behind bars. Richard was in ICU. That left only one man who could still walk free. Victor Hensley. Ochoa drove through the night to Hensley's estate on the far side of the city. The gates loomed, iron and ornate, guarding a mansion lit like a fortress. Guards watched from the shadows. He showed his badge, demanded entrance. Hensley received him in the library, brandy in hand, his smile serpentine. "You've been busy, detective," he said smoothly, "chasing roses, cuffing ghosts. Meanwhile, I've been patient." Ochoa's fists clenched. "Where's Evelyn getting her orders?" "Who's feeding her?" Hensley laughed. "Orders? Oh no, she's not my dog. She's Richard's, always has been. I simply held the leash when he was tired." "Then what do you want?" Hensley leaned forward, his eyes glittering. "The one thing Richard never gave me. The crown. And she is the crown Vivian." "Vivian," he echoed softly, savoring her name. Ochoa stormed out, fury boiling. He knew then that Vivian's survival wasn't victory. It was a contest. Her body and blood passed like currency between predators. He returned to the hospital at dawn, exhausted, only to find the halls in chaos. Vivian's bed was empty, the window open, and on the pillow, a single rose. The hospital room was chaos. Nurses shouted, security combed the halls, alarms blared. Yet Vivian was gone, vanished through an open window 6 stories up. Detective Ochoa gripped the sill, rain dampening his hands. The ledge outside bore scuff marks, a rope dangling into the storm-dark garden below. She hadn't walked out. She'd been taken. and the rose on her pillow, red and perfect, told him exactly who had orchestrated it. Hours later, the city buzzed with news of the abduction. Helicopters circled the coast, searchlights combed the bluffs, roadblocks clogged highways. But Ochoa knew Vivian hadn't been carried far. Hensley wouldn't hide her in plain sight. He'd bring her somewhere symbolic, somewhere that completed Richard's circle, the Halden Grand. He arrived at the resort just before midnight. The waves pounded the cliffs, their roar echoing through the mist. The once proud facade of the hotel loomed, its chandeliers still glittering, though the halls were dark. Guests had been evacuated, leaving the property silent but for the storm. Inside, Ochoa followed the trail, petals scattered along the marble floor, leading deeper into the bowels of the resort. Past the ballroom, past the kitchens, down the service corridors that smelled of bleach and rust. Finally, the trail ended at a door he had seen before, the vault entrance. The roses pointed downward. The tunnels beneath the Halden Grand breathed with damp air, stone walls sweating, shadows thick. Ochoa moved cautiously, flashlights sweeping across graffiti, rusted pipes, discarded chains. He heard it before he saw it, the faint echo of voices, drifting from deeper chambers. "She was never yours." Evelyn's voice, sharp, ragged. "She was never yours either," came Hensley's reply, cold and calm. "She was Richard's, and Richard's legacy is mine now." Ochoa edged closer, heart hammering. The chamber opened into a cavern lit by lanterns. Roses covered the floor, fresh bouquets piled in grotesque shrines against the walls. At the center stood Vivian, bound to a chair, her face pale but defiant. Evelyn stood to one side, revolver in hand. Hensley stood opposite, his immaculate suit incongruous against the dripping stone. "You're both wrong," Vivian whispered, her voice trembling but strong. "I was never his." "Not then, not now, and I'll never be yours." Hensley smiled. "That's where you're mistaken. You are the crown jewel of this empire, and jewels don't choose their owners." Evelyn raised her weapon. "If you touch her," Hensley's laugh was soft, "you'll shoot me. You've had decades to kill Richard. Decades. You waited until he was half dead to finally pull the trigger. You're weak, Evelyn. Always have been." Ochoa stepped into the light, weapon drawn. "Enough." Both heads turned. "Detective," Hensley said smoothly, unruffled, "just in time. Perhaps you'll settle this. Which prison suits her best, chains of stone or chains of bloodline?" "She's not property," Ochoa snapped. "Not Richard's. Not yours. Not anyone's." Vivian's eyes met his, desperate, pleading. "Then free her," Hensley challenged, spreading his arms. "Go on. Walk her out of here, and watch the Empire swallow you both whole." Evelyn's hands shook, her revolver wavering. "He's right. They'll never let her go. She's the last Calloway worth anything." "Then we burn it down," Ochoa said, his voice steady. "All of it. The ledgers, the tunnels, the truth. We don't hide it anymore. We bury it with light." Evelyn's face crumpled. For a moment, her aim dropped. Then she raised it again, this time at Hensley. "Light won't stop him," she said. "But this will." The shot rang out, deafening in the cavern. Hensley staggered, clutching his side. Blood spread across his suit, dark and thick, but his smile didn't fade. He sank to one knee, his eyes glittering. "Richard taught me well," he gasped. "Pain isn't defeat. Pain is proof you still rule." He reached into his coat, pulling a small knife, gleaming even in the dim light. Vivian screamed. Evelyn fired again, the second shot ripping through his chest. Hensley collapsed at last, roses crushed beneath him, petals darkened with blood. Silence filled the cavern, broken only by Vivian's sobs. Ochoa rushed forward, cutting Vivian's bindings. Her body sagged against him, trembling, but her eyes locked on Evelyn. "You should have done it years ago," Vivian whispered. Evelyn lowered the revolver, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "I couldn't. I thought I was saving you by keeping him alive, but all I did was feed the monster." Vivian's voice broke. "Then maybe we're both monsters." She turned into Ochoa's arms, burying her face in his shoulder. They emerged from the tunnels just before dawn. Police swarmed the grounds, lights flashing, sirens wailing. Medics carried Hensley's body out on a stretcher, his face still frozen in that final smile. Evelyn was led away in cuffs, her gaze fixed on Vivian until the last moment. Ochoa stayed at Vivian's side as she was wrapped in blankets, her wrists cleaned and bandaged. "It's over," he murmured. Her eyes, hollow but steady, met his. "It's never over." Not until Richard is gone 2 days later. Richard Calloway died. The official report read, "Cardiac failure due to complications of gunshot trauma." But whispers spread that he had chosen the moment, waiting until Hensley was in the ground before surrendering his own breath. Vivian didn't attend the funeral. Neither did Evelyn, now awaiting trial. The Empire's heirs were gone, its foundations cracked. The Halden Grand was shuttered, its suites locked, its future uncertain. Yet the handprint on the bathroom mirror of the penthouse, faded but still faintly visible, remained untouched, a stain that no renovation could erase. Weeks later, Ochoa stood on the cliffs, staring at the waves. Vivian had vanished again, but this time by choice. No abduction, no chains, just a quiet disappearance, leaving behind her notebooks, her name, her crown. Some said she boarded a plane under a false passport. Others swore they saw her wandering coastal towns, a blue scarf wrapped around her hair. Ochoa didn't chase her. For the first time, her absence wasn't a crime to solve. It was freedom. Months later, tourists whispered that roses sometimes appeared on the cliffs near the shuttered resort. Fresh, vibrant, tied with silk. Some said they were offerings to the lost heiress wherever she had gone. Others claimed they were left by her. Proof she still lived, still watched, still carried the weight of the empire even in exile. And in the ocean's roar, beneath the cries of gulls, some swore they heard a woman's voice whispering against the wind. I was never his. The courtroom was heavy with whispers. Dust motes swirled in the sunlight slanting through tall windows, catching on the gold trim of the state seal above the judge's bench. Evelyn Calloway Halden sat at the defense table, wrists unshackled, posture rigid. Her hair, once immaculate, had streaked to gray during her months of incarceration. She wore a simple navy dress, no jewelry. Her eyes scanned the gallery. Reporters, former staff of the Halden Grand, a smattering of curious locals who had followed every twist of the heiress's story. But not Vivian. Vivian hadn't set foot in the courtroom. The prosecutor painted Evelyn as accomplice and jailer, a woman who had enabled Richard Calloway's crimes for decades. She had tracked shipments, silenced staff, locked doors. She had known what was happening beneath the hotel and had chosen complicity over exposure. The defense countered with another portrait. Evelyn as a victim herself. Groomed young, bound by Richard's will, wielding survival in the only way she knew. She had fired the bullets that ended Victor Hensley's reign. Without her, the heiress might still be in chains. Witnesses testified. Detectives, former employees, medical experts. Even Ochoa took the stand, laying out the ledgers, the roses, the tunnels. But no voice carried more weight than Micah Carraway's. Micah sat frail in his wheelchair, his chest sunken, his hands shaking. The courtroom hushed as he began, his voice raspy but steady. I was part of it, he confessed, not by choice, by weakness. I stood by while my son, Reed, and Richard built their empire of shadows. I told myself I couldn't stop them, that it was too late. But the truth is, I didn't want to pay the price of trying. Evelyn, she was no different. She did what I did, watched, excused, survived. Until survival became its own crime. He paused, eyes glistening. I don't ask you to forgive her, but I ask you to see her. Because if you condemn her alone, you condemn only half the story. The other half is Richard, and Richard's already in the ground. The jury deliberated for 3 days. They found Evelyn guilty of conspiracy, obstruction, and unlawful imprisonment. Not guilty of murder, though the weight of silence sat heavy. She was sentenced to 25 years. When the gavel struck, Evelyn didn't flinch. She rose, smoothing her dress, and allowed herself to be led away. As she passed Ochoa in the gallery, her eyes lingered just for a moment. There was no plea in them, no hatred, only resignation. The Halden Grand closed that same winter. The resort's chandeliers dimmed, its suites locked. Bankruptcy proceedings began, creditors circling like vultures. The Callaway empire, once untouchable, fractured into lawsuits and liquidations. The Penthouse suite remained sealed. No renovations, no auctions. Staff claimed the handprint was still there, faint but visible on the bathroom mirror. The tunnels beneath the hotel were filled with concrete. Police sealed every entrance, citing safety hazards. But rumors spread that not all passages had been found. That beneath the cliffs, the ocean still whispered against hidden doors. Vivian became a ghost story again. Months passed without sighting, then years. Reporters claimed to have tracked her to Lisbon, to Prague, to a convent in Mexico. None confirmed. Some believed she had taken a new name, shedding the weight of Callaway like a skin. Others insisted she had drowned herself in the Pacific, finally surrendering to the waves that had always called to her. But Detective Ochoa knew better. 5 years later, he received a package. No return address. Inside, wrapped in parchment, a single blue handbag, the same one found in Reed Caraway's office years before. Inside the lining, tucked behind the erased tag, a note. Detective, you were right. Truth doesn't free us, but it does light the way. I walk in shadows, but I am not his shadow anymore. Tell them I am alive. Tell them I am not property. Tell them the rose chose me. V. Ochoa sat with the bag on his desk long after the station emptied for the night. Rain streaked the windows, echoing the night she had first vanished from the hospital. She was alive. Somewhere. And she had chosen silence. Not as a prison this time, but as freedom. Evelyn's health declined in prison. Word came that she rarely spoke, rarely wrote. But on her last birthday, a guard found a single rose on her bunk. Fresh. No visitor had been recorded. She died in her sleep weeks later. Some said the rose had withered black, its petals curling like ashes. Richard's grave, meanwhile, became a strange pilgrimage site. Some came to spit, others to whisper prayers for the dead. Still others left roses, though no one admitted who. Hensley's grave drew no visitors. His estate was seized, his name scrubbed from ledgers. But his influence lingered, threads woven into corporations and shell companies that no investigator could fully untangle. The empire didn't die. It just learned to wear new masks. As for Ochoa, he retired quietly, his badge locked in a drawer, his days filled with fishing trips and dog walks. Yet the case never left him. Sometimes, when the sea fog rolled heavy, he thought he saw her figure on the cliffs, a woman with hair tangled in the wind, a blue scarf tied around her shoulders. He never approached. He never called out, because Vivian Callaway Halden had spent enough of her life being hunted. Now, at last, she belonged to herself. And still, roses bloomed on the cliffs each spring. Red, white, and sometimes the rarest blue. No one knew who left them. No one dared take them away.